Welcome to the Wizard's fireplace, actually. Today we're going to talk about alternators, batteries, and fuel pumps. Oh my! Let's get started. Before we get started on the alternator, fuel pump, battery situation, I want to let you guys know that Mrs. Wizard just put out a video on her channel about my surgery. You can definitely go watch that and check out how that went. And also Wednesday, December 13th, is when the auction ends for Mrs. Wizard's part work. So you definitely want to get in on that if you're interested in any gift ideas or just want to own a piece of the shop or things that have been in the shop. Make sure to get in and put your bid in. All the things will be ending on December 13th. Now back to the video. So here we are in the winter season. We're actually at a fireplace and I'm still recovering from my surgery. I'm doing a lot better. Still a little stuffy, but a little bit of swelling, but it's almost all the way healed up. I'm very happy about that. But today we're going to talk about how do you know or how can you tell when your car has issues? Is it an alternator, a battery, or a fuel pump as far as starting the engine? Whether it won't crank or won't start or whatnot. This is actually a very confusing situation for most people. All you know is you go to your car an early winter morning, you go to start your car, and for whatever reason it won't start. There's a lot of details, especially if you call a shop, that need to be told to help with the diagnosis process and also to help stop a possible misdiagnosis. So, without further ado, we'll get started on the list here, and hopefully this will help you guys out if you run into this problem. Like I mentioned, it's very easy to get confused in the situation. We've got phone calls coming to the shop where my car won't start. I think it's this or I think it's that. One thing to make sure of is probably not tell the shop what you think it is, because let them figure it out. Let the professional techs dive in and figure it out, because in the confusion I'm talking about, there's many times where Crazy D in the office will say, well, what do you mean it won't start? Does it crank? Does it actually turn over? Does it act like it wants to start? And the common answer is, I don't know, it just won't start. And it's to be expected, because your car won't start. So we're going to go through the list of, with the symptoms you're seeing, what it possibly could be. So in the no start situation, there's a question that needs to be answered, or at least a few questions. Does the engine actually crank, or does it just click whenever you turn the key to start the engine? If it just goes click, that means your engine's not cranking. It's not physical. You can't hear it physically cranking and spinning over. Now if it is cranking, but it just won't start, that's called cranks but no start. The situation where it just clicks is called no crank, no start. So let's say your fuel pump has died. What can you expect to see when you go to start your car? There's been many times where someone will say they thought it was an alternator, and we get it into the shop. It had nothing to do with batteries or alternators. This is a bad fuel pump. The engine would crank strong. I mean, you would spin over fast. The engine, it wants to start. That tells me one thing, the battery's good. Obviously the starter is good. But unbeknownst to some people, the alternator has nothing to do with your car cranking over. Unless it's failed and the battery's dead because it wasn't charging the battery. But if you have a good battery and the engine's cranking over, your alternator is completely out of the equation while it's cranking. So a fuel pump that dies will cause a scenario where the engine spins over nice and strong, but it just won't start. It'll crank forever until the battery's dead, but it never fires off. That's a symptom you can expect to see with a dead fuel pump. Now a carbureted car, which most people don't have anymore, will have the same symptoms, but it could be a flooded carburetor or flooded engine, or it could be no fuel. But most people deal with fuel injection today, so that's mainly what we're talking about. Now when an alternator fails, what can we expect to see when that happens? What are the symptoms that you're going to have when the alternator literally gives up the ghost? The engine may start. It may run just fine. But you'll notice on your dash or your cluster, there'll actually be a little red light that's shaped like a battery. It'll be the battery light is on. That's an indication to you that although the engine is running and the battery was good enough to start the car, the battery light means it's not charging. The battery is running itself dead. The alternator is not contributing to keeping the battery charged at this moment. That is a definite symptom of a bad alternator. On modern cars today, especially European cars, when voltages get low, like when an alternator fails, you will get an entire slew of warning lights. All kinds of things. If you read the codes as if the world is coming to an end. When in reality, you've got this module says voltage low. The brake module, voltage low. The body control module, voltage low. The climate control module, voltage low. They're all just screaming, something's wrong, there's not enough power here. You'll see all these blinking lights and things going off. It looks like your car is about to really have a conniption fit or something, but it can all be the alternator has failed. One thing you'll notice too, like if you're cruising at night, all of a sudden your headlights go half the brightness that they were just a minute ago, and then the battery light comes on. That can be an indication your alternator just failed. Another indication, there's a different type of a failure inside of an alternator where it is charging the battery, but the diodes are bad and it's actually leaking out AC voltage into your DC electrical system in your car. You'll see your dome lights, your headlights, or various illuminating things in your car will actually flicker like this. And if you give it more RPM, they go faster. That's a good indication that an alternator is failing as well. But most people don't experience that part of an alternator failure. What they're going to experience is while they're driving, the battery light comes on. It's not charging the battery, and the battery will eventually go dead at this point because it's not receiving a charge from the alternator. So when an alternator is failing, your car could possibly still start. It can possibly still drive. When this happens, or if this happens, if you're only a couple miles away from a repair shop or a way to get this solved, turn off a lot of your accessories, your air conditioner, things that you don't need. If it's at night, obviously you need your headlights. Don't turn those off. But during the day, turn off most everything you're not using. That may give you a few more miles. You could probably drive it to a shop, park it, and see if they can get it in or work it in or whatever and get that resolved. If not, if you're just a few miles from home, you can probably make it home. But once you make it to either the shop or home, you don't need to drive it anymore. You need to either get a tow truck to get it from home to shop or figure out what you're going to do there. Now, the last one we're going to talk about is battery. What happens or what can you expect when your battery is dead? And that is when you open the door, there's no dome light that comes on. You turn on the key, nothing happens. You actually try to start it, nothing happens. The battery is stone dead at that point. It can be just enough charge in there that the lights come on, you turn on your key, things come alive, but as soon as you go to start it, you get click, and everything goes dead. That's definitely a sign that your battery has failed or is failing. At this time, it could be that your alternator has failed. That's why your battery is low. But most of the time, I would say 9 times out of 10, the battery itself is probably failing. Or something is draining your battery, which one time out of 10, that's also a problem, where an auxiliary item in the cigarette lighter or auxiliary port, like a phone charger or something, that can drain the battery. Left the headlights on, some cars that'll drain the battery. But most of the time, it's just the battery itself has failed. All these things can be very confusing. We've had these scenarios pop up where they call and it cranks, but it won't start. And they'll tell Crazy D, hey, my alternator's bad. Just make sure that you kind of shy away from telling them what you think is wrong. Just get it to the shop, let them figure out what it is, because that'll save a lot of time. If you tell them, my alternator's bad, it may be that they take your word for it, they put an alternator in, only to find out that was never the problem to begin with. You just got charged for an alternator, it didn't even need one, and now they can turn the tables on you and say, you told us to put that in, but it didn't fix it. So be careful there. Don't tell people what they should be doing. Let them know what the symptoms are. And then from there, they can get the car in and figure out what's going on and found out it wasn't an alternator. It was actually your fuel pump was bad. Definitely keep an eye on that if these issues arise. How long do these items usually last? An alternator can last 10 or 15 or 20 years. It can last quite a long time. A battery, 5 to 7 years, depending on the quality of battery you bought or what kind of loads you expect. Also, the climate you live in, if it's extremely cold, that can take a toll on batteries. But generally, 5 to 7 years will be the lifespan of a battery. A fuel pump, 15 to 20 years again. They last quite a long time. But those days do eventually come where you go to start your car and one of these items have failed. Now we're going to talk about, once these items have failed, where are they even located? Where are these things at? Some of us gearheads, we know where a battery is at, but not everyone does. So we're going to go through the list real quick. The alternator, just like in this picture, is always bolted to the engine and it's ran off a belt. If you look at your serpentine belt on your car and follow it around, you will see an item or a round cylinder shaped, usually aluminum colored item. That's the alternator. Sometimes they're really easy to get to. Sometimes they're very hard to get to. But that's typically where they're going to be located. The battery, most of us would think, oh, well, that's in the engine bay. That's easy. It's right next to the engine along the edges of where the engine is. Somewhere on the passenger or driver's side. Easy to get to every time. But that's not true anymore. A lot of manufacturers are now putting them in the trunk or even under the back seat, and even on some models under the front seats. Like in an SUV, like an ML350 Mercedes, the battery will be under one of the either driver or passenger seat. You have to move the seat all the way forward and then open up the cavity and get inside and change the battery. If you're not sure where it's at, you can also run a Google search, look up your model, year, make of car. Very likely you'll find the answer there as well. Where's the fuel pump located on a modern fuel injected car? It's inside the fuel tank. On most cars, just like in this picture here, the fuel tank has to be removed from the bottom of the vehicle down, with the vehicle being on a lift. This makes it very expensive and can be very difficult to do. There are a great number of cars now that you can remove the back seat, just like in this picture, and access a little hole right underneath the seat, and there's your fuel pump right there, very easy to get to, which makes it a little cheaper to replace. But the fuel pump, 99% of the time, is always going to be inside the fuel tank. Now, whether you have to drop the tank to get to it or you can access it, it'll be depending on the model of car you have. On carbureted cars, usually this fuel pump is mechanical and it's mounted to the engine. But that's really not even 1% of the cases we see. And the running joke in the shop is your fuel pump will always fail right after you fill it from an empty tank to a full tank. You won't even make it a mile off the gas station and it'll die. I think it has something to do with thermodynamics. I've kind of figured it out why it does that. The parts and pieces that spin inside the fuel pump, which was currently working, when you put cold fuel out of the ground, which is probably 50 degrees, it all of a sudden shrinks the bushings or bearings and things, and it locks up and it's done. So that kind of makes sense. Is there a way to prevent that? Not really. Filling it up a certain level, or don't keep going after the first click, or never run it that low. It doesn't matter. When it fails, you're never really going to know when it's going to fail, so there's no way to prevent that. So now we've talked about where are all these items located. Now we can talk about when one of these fails, what can I expect to pay for that repair? 10 years ago, it wasn't that long ago, an alternator could be 50 or 60, maybe $100. That is not true in 2023, or here we're going into 24. They are no longer $75. They are $275, possibly up to $1,000, just for the part. That didn't include nobody taking it off and replacing it for you. That's just for the part. On higher end cars, especially Mercedes-Benz or Porsches or things, alternators can easily be $1,000. You're not really going to find an alternator on most cars today for under $200. They're going to be at least $200, very likely closer to $300. There are some cheaper options out there that are reman units that are very poorly done, maybe in China or something like that. You want to stay away from those because they will last 6 months and you'll be back in the same position all over again. It's just not worth it. So with labor and the parts and everything, what can you expect on an alternator bill on a modern car? $750 to $1,200 or more. You add an hour or 2 or 3 of labor, depending on how hard it is to get to, plus a $300 alternator and sales tax and everything, boom, you're at $700 or $800, just like that. So that's the range you can expect for an alternator. Now we're going to move to a battery. I can remember a day when me and Mrs. Wizard had only been married a few years where you could go get a brand new battery for $49.99. I remember those days.
That was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but it's AutoZone, O'Reilly's, wherever you go, they had an option, $49, $59, and maybe a $79 high-end battery. Those days are gone. Every battery I've ever bought for a car in the last year was at least $150. Some batteries being $250 or $300. They're so expensive now. If the battery's easy to get to in the engine bay, you can usually go to your local parts store. They will sell you a battery and they will put it in for you for free. That's the best option. But if you have a car where it's deep inside the trunk, where you have to remove the seats or take things apart, they're probably not going to do that for free. You may need to take it to a shop. Some newer cars also have a battery monitoring system or software that you can't just slap a new battery in and call it good, because then it won't charge it properly and it'll actually make the system very angry with you. You may need to have an expensive professional level scan tool to actually go in and tell the computer, hey, I installed a new battery, you need to reset the charging parameters now. So having your local parts store just slap a battery in, that's probably not a good option on most newer cars. And in that case, getting a new battery is not going to be $150, $200 with free installation. Now we're talking $250, $350, $400, depending on how hard it is to get to the battery. On a higher end car, the battery's going to cost more. It could be an hour of labor to not only replace the battery, then you got to get the scan tool out and go through and reset the parameters. The stuff adds up pretty quick. Don't get mad that you have to take your car to a shop to have a simple battery changed out, because there's so much technology and things going on anymore that it's just the way it is. Even with modern things in the house, like you put a new filter in your refrigerator, a water filter, you have to go into the software and reset it and do all these things. It's not so simple anymore. It's just kind of the way it is. I didn't create those systems. Maybe if you want to blow some steam, contact the car manufacturers and tell them you're not happy. I don't know. That's just the way it is. So $150 to $500 is pretty much the range you can expect if your battery is dead, depending on what kind of car you drive. Now we're going to move on to the fuel pump. What can you expect to pay if your fuel pump is dead? If it's like one of the vehicles I've shown where the back seat can come out and it's easy to get to, you can expect to pay around $700. The fuel pump module itself is not some $50 item. Nowadays they are $250, $450, $550, depends on what kind of car you have. Again, they can be very expensive. But for most cars on the road, $700 or $800 is probably going to cover the labor, the fuel pump costs, and all those things to get that taken care of. Also, there's going to be a diagnostic fee. And sales tax. Don't forget sales tax. If the vehicle requires the fuel tank to come down out of the vehicle, this is going to cost a lot more. It's not going to be an hour of labor. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 hours of labor, maybe more, depending on what vehicle it is. Just like in Hoovie's Garage, you recently saw a Callaway Camaro that he purchased. any of those years of Camaros, it's quite an ordeal to get the fuel tank down. It's actually so well known how difficult it is that in that community, the Camaro community, it's actually common for people to cut a hole in the floor to get to the fuel pump because they're just like, I'm not doing that, bro. I'm not taking all that stuff apart. That is not going to be a cheap fuel pump unless you let them cut a hole in it. But in this situation, it's probably $1,200 to $1,400 to get a fuel pump, to pull the whole tank down and do all the whole rigmarole and do all that. That's what you can expect there. And don't worry about the fuel in the tank. We don't even have to remove the fuel or do anything with that. The fuel stays in place. All we replace is the pump, put the new one in, put it back together. So your investment that you just spent filling up your tank to the full level is still intact. Don't worry about that. Out of the 3 items we mentioned, which ones are safe to have a friend or a family member or kind of a mechanically inclined friend or whatever repair for you and save some money, and which ones really need to go to a shop? With a battery on an older vehicle where it's in the engine bay or there's no software monitoring the battery, that's safe to have a parts store or a friend or family member change that out for you. All you have the cost of is the battery itself. That's fairly safe to do. However, if it's very difficult to get to the battery, it's under the seat or deep inside the trunk, or it requires resetting with a professional level scan tool, you probably should leave that to the shop and let them take care of that for you. If you're not sure if your vehicle needs that or not, Google is your friend here. You can type in your year, make, model, battery replacement, and see what the steps are involved for your particular vehicle. Now let's move on to alternators. These can be replaced by a mechanically inclined friend or family member if it's really easy to get to, right there in the engine bay. You just take the belt off and easy to get to. But some alternators, just like in this picture here, are very difficult to get to. You have to put it on a lift, take the wheel off, take a wheel well off, and it can be quite extensive to get to. That's probably one I would say no. Don't let the friend or family member touch it, because I have had to go behind the friends or family members in these situations and it wasn't very pretty. Let the shop take care of that situation. Most alternators are held on with 3 or 4 bolts. You have to disconnect the battery, because if you unhook the main cable from the alternator and let it dangle, it can short circuit and it can melt some things, so be careful there. But if it's easily visible, easy to get to, and you have a mechanically inclined friend, 3 or 4 bolts, they can have it taken care of. I would say that that's fine. Now the final thing, fuel pump. Don't let a friend or family member change your fuel pump, no matter how easy it is. I've had many situations where a friend or family member has done a fuel pump for a customer and it botched it so bad. I actually had a red Chevy truck come in. They let a friend change out their fuel pump, and it was literally every time they went around a corner or if they filled up with gas, it was literally a waterfall of gas coming down their gas tank. All it takes is a small spark and boom, you just lost your truck. Did you really save any money in that instance? No, it's very dangerous. If it's a car that the tank has to be dropped, you really don't want to do that on the ground. Your friend or family member could actually be injured by the weight of a fuel tank full of fuel falling on them. It could really put them in the hospital. Even if it's a simple one where the back seat comes out and you can get to it pretty easy, it just takes one small mistake where they don't get the sealing ring put on just right. And then you can smell fuel into your interior. Get the smell, can make you sick, or it can start a fire. So with fuel pumps in modern cars, leave those to the professionals. You probably don't want your friend or family member changing those out for you. So hopefully this video helps you guys out. If you experience these symptoms, you go out in the morning and one of these things happens to you, by watching this video you can now say, I have a clearer idea now what to expect, what's possibly wrong with my car, and how to handle this situation. That's kind of the reason why we made this video for you guys today. Also make sure to check our Amazon affiliate link in the description below. It's getting to be gift giving season. There's some definite gift ideas there. And we get a small cut if you purchase anything. Really appreciate it. Make sure to hit the subscribe button here because we have many more cool videos to come. Thanks for watching.